once they put the fire out, the mushrooms mostly went back to their underground barrels. Hello, everybody. My name is TBSkyen. I am here with Patrick Scarizard Scarborough.
I'm sorry. No, that was really one of the best stories that I've ever heard. Sad to say that it had to be cut out of the intro. Hello, everybody. I am, as Skyen says, Patrick Scarizard Scarborough. You can really call me whatever you like.
Yeah.
Any combination of those usually works. Skyen, how are you doing? Good evening to you. Good morning to me.
Yeah, pretty much. The time zones are a hell of a thing. Welcome to BUSYBEARDS, our little podcasts where a couple of busy boys with beards talk about some stuff, including, our lives as online internet content creatory persons. Mm-hmm. So, how have your last couple of weeks been? You've a little thing happened to you on your stream.
Yeah, well, it's actually interesting that we recorded the last podcast, episode 1, 2 weeks ago, and in that time, I have released 3 episodes of my new YouTube series. All 3 of them by the time this is probably out, and I have been sponsored by Omen by HP. Which is Hewlett-Packard's gaming brand. It's difficult for me to talk about because we meme it so hard that it's now in this like weird niche humor space that I'm currently wearing an Omen by HP branded sweater next to my Omen by HP branded headset, and it's just I've got a whole bunch of Omen shit all around the house. But that did happen. It did happen on Wednesday, which is very cool. So yeah, I guess I don't really know what else to say. They gave me a whole bunch of gaming stuff, and I put their hashtags in my tweets, and I'm promoting them now. So that's we're working together on all that stuff.
Yeah, and I encourage anyone. I encourage anyone who listens to the podcast to tune into Patrick's stream every once in a while and just spam Omen by HP comments in his chat and just make him talk about the magnificent value of Omen by HP products, because it's just fun. It's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun rating your stream, by the way.
Yeah,
you had your sponsorship announcement. That was a good time.
I appreciate being by. Some of the folks from your raid stuck around, and I think they ended up having a fun time as well. The whole first hour of that stream, I didn't get to actually play the game. I was, if anyone out there has ever had the thing where it's like you haven't eaten, but you gain more energy, and you're about to crash, but you kind of have this adrenaline rush for right now. I spent 53 minutes, someone clocked it, 53 minutes not playing the game, just responding to questions, and there's like a clip of me doing tongue twisters. Like I went into full auctioneer voice mode, like trying to respond to everyone. It was a pretty nuts time, I think, overall. It was
pretty magnificent.
Yeah, I was happy to see you there. I also got to say, while we're kind of on the subject, if you have the means, and if you've ever been on the fence, please go play Ni no Kuni 2. Please, God, just go enjoy that hell of a game. It's
President Gun and his fantastic animal friends.
It's just I don't want to completely bulldoze past the thing, but maybe we'll get back on track. I know we had some topics that people from the comment section and everyone were like, oh, let's talk about these, but I just rather than eventually being like, oh, what are you playing or whatever, I figured we'll just get this out of the way. I have to say it again because everyone who came into the chat was like, what the fuck is this game? And I would tell them the plot of the game, and they would be like, oh, you're just making that up. That's so funny. He's so wacky. And I'm like, no, it's not. And if the more they stuck around, they really understood. In Ni no Kuni, you play as the President of the United States. Just going to pause that right there. The literal President of the United States. It begins with you literally in like a convoy with like other black cars, and you see the seal of with the eagle holding the arrows and shit. Like you just are the President of America. And then a bomb goes off, and you're sent 30 years in the past, and also into a different dimension where you materialize as a young cat boy is about to be named king, and as his country is being overthrown by mice. And and it just never gets less insane. And it plays it entirely straight, which is, I think, the best part. Like, it's not like Saints Row. It's not like super goofy. It's just... It just picks these wild, whimsical, ridiculous concepts. Like, yeah, there's like a whole nation that's basically Amazon. Like, it's just a tech bro nation that's things like that. There's like a place where merfolk live, that love is outlawed. This like Ghibli-esque shit everywhere around the world. It's super insane. It's unbelievable. Your eyes will pop out of your fucking skull as you play it. It's super cute and super earnest. And it's got action slashy RPG gameplay similar to Dark Cloud 2, one of my favorite games of all time. So if you've ever been on the fence, please go play that. That's my pitch. I'm sorry, Skyen, you have the floor.
Because Ni no Kuni 2 is a game, like, my favorite thing about that game is that as the president of the United States, you have a handgun.
Right.
Like a real, actual, real-world, realistically rendered handgun with which you shoot and kill various fantasy creatures in a Ghibli-esque sort of fantastical little fairy tale universe. And it's just the best visual of all time.
Yeah. Well, and the best part is it's not even, like, sometimes there'll be, like... What am I trying to say? Like you'll have like a cognitive break between cutscenes and in-game stuff in RPGs, right? You're like, wow, I have like an incredibly overpowered RPG character, but then in cutscenes they're still struggling against this thing. He pulls out and uses the gun in cutscenes. Like multiple NPCs from the enemy side are murdered by his Glock. Just fucking, you just hear a gunshot off camera and you pull, and there he is. Inexplicably younger for some reason, President Roland fantasy shifted into a different universe, holding a smoking gun over the dead body of some mouse guard. And you're like, what the fuck is this? You can't do this. But they do, and they do it again and again. It's wild.
Yeah, I mean, I never got to play through the original Ni no Kuni fully. I had it on PS3, but I never got entirely through it. But Ni no Kuni 2 is a game I've been eyeing for a long time. As for me, I've been playing Diablo, weirdly, and not like I've been playing the original Diablo from back in the 90s.
Not like D3 or something.
No.
The Diablo.
And the reason I started playing is because I found that someone had made like an HD patch mod kind of thing.
I see.
To make it work on Windows 10, and they have done like a huge amount of work on that. They've created new boss fights, they've created new weapon types, they've put in entirely new dungeons that you can access, like the whole the Butcher, for example, like that first quest you usually get in the game. Instead of him just kind of hanging out in a room in the cathedral, you go into his room, you cast Town Portal, and then it takes you to a sub-level that is like designed entirely for him. And he has new abilities, and he can do knockback, he can charge at you. Like, they've done all kinds of shit to change the game up to make it much, much more modern and honestly a hell of a lot more fun and a lot more challenging. So I've been having a hell of a lot of fun with that. Because Diablo was like my first experience with any like a Western role-playing game on the PC. I think that was the first one I really picked up before I started getting into actual RPGs and stuff like that. So that whole thing of putting points into stats and stuff like that, that's really that's where I started experiencing that kind of thing. And so going back to it, I've been struck by how dramatic the transformation really is between Diablo 1, 2, and 3.
Well, this is, I mean, first off, I gotta say, it doesn't even sound like you're playing Diablo. Like, it sounds like the amount of actually new or bonus content that you're experiencing, like, it's almost... maybe it's
like Diablo with a couple of expansion packs, basically.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's probably disingenuous to be like, it's a whole new game. Like, you're definitely still playing Diablo, but I guess I wanted to give like a shout out to any, just the communities out there that make this kind of shit, because that's nuts. Like, I was expecting like, oh, here's old man Skyen again talking about his old Diablo game, and they gave it a new coat of paint. But no, it's you're like, no, there's a reason I'm playing this, and they've put a whole bunch of work into it, and that's crazy. I never played the original Diablo. I played a little bit of D2. Funny enough, like right before my Riot interview, I played like an hour and a half of it, and I hated it. And then I wanted to play D3 right as I had started, but there were a bunch of people on my team who were addicted to D3 or just Diablo as a franchise, and they were saying how much Diablo 3 sucked. So I only played it when the Reaper of Souls expansion came out, and a lot of people were like, "It's fixed, it's good now." And for my money, I thought it was a fun game, but I just mean, you're coming on one very far end of the spectrum. I am hyper casual in terms of my Diablo. I guess like legacy understanding, but when you say it's very different, like what struck out to you? Because you're saying you were kind of taken aback by
because you'll know from playing Diablo 3 that it's very much a loot grind kind of game. Like you go around, you kill a bunch of stuff, things pop out everywhere, and you pick up loot, you pick up this one has better numbers, replace that one with better numbers, and so on. And that's sort of to me, it's kind of an interesting shift to look at what Diablo 3 has focused so heavily on, like the action gameplay and the loot grind. And then you play original Diablo, and it's like, this is a grid-based game where you have one walking speed, and it is incredibly slow.
Oh god!
And you just kind of have to inch your way forward, and you have to very carefully manage the crowds of monsters because you don't really have a lot of attacks. Like you can auto attack, and if you're a wizard, you can cast spells. But that's about all you can do. So it's like a game where you have a very limited set of actions that you can do, and the gameplay is really more about manipulating, making sure that you don't get surrounded by enemies. It's like the main thing that you have to do, because you're not a barbarian. You can't leap out of things. You can't spin attack or teleport or do anything. You really have to manage your spacing carefully, and it's a very different experience. And it's partly like just the technical limitations of being a game from the 90s, obviously, but it's also the approach that it has to the kind of world that it builds. The original Diablo is really fucking dark and gothic. Like, just super... Like, Diablo is possessing the body of the young prince of the land, a literal child. So, at the end of the game, when you win by killing Diablo, you have murdered a child. That's the ending cutscene.
Well, all right.
Of the game, which is like a very different thing from the sort of high melodrama of a game like Diablo 3.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's even funny that you mentioned that, because even D3, as someone who is super new to it, right, it feels like they go out of their way to try, like, the lore for the previous games is technically available, but they try to obscure it as much as possible. Like, even when you pick it up in those, like, high-quality audio recordings, they don't 100%, they're like, Diablo possessed a person that had sex with this other woman, then Diablo was born out of that. And you're like, I guess I know what happened to the old... there's a demon and it comes back. And if you can get to there, then Blizzard's happy that, I guess. And now, it makes sense. They're like, we don't want you to remember that, like, a decade ago or 15 years ago or whatever, we made you kill, like, a child. Like, that's how dark our shit went, when you consider, like, the host of their modern... sort of stuff. Like, not like, WoW or Battle for Azeroth or something is like super goofy and light, but, you compare it to Overwatch, you compare it to other things they've been doing, it's not that deep, like that kind of fucked up and murder a baby just because Satan's in him. So.
Yeah, literally, you're exploring the first level you explore is a cathedral, and it's just like it's a church. And one of the primary antagonists in the game is an archbishop. So, like, there's a lot of Christian imagery going on in there that they've largely purged from later Diablo games, where it's like, oh yeah, the heavens and the demons, but it's not like crosses are everywhere and stuff like that. They're very much everywhere in Diablo. It's very, very, very steeped in sort of Christian imagery, which is something that Blizzard kind of backed off of. But the thing that interested me is, I thought about Diablo in the context of a game like Red Alert, which like started out as this like, of course, like it's an offshoot of Command and Conquer, so it's cheesy, but it was this sort of semi-serious alternate history. What if Einstein used a time machine to kill Hitler? And then the game posits, well, we would still have World War II, except we would all be fighting Stalin instead. And it tried a sort of semi-grounded approach to its cheesiness. And then by Red Alert 3, it's like you're parachuting like psychic Japanese schoolgirls into the middle of America while your Japanese battle robots cross the sea by walking along the bottom of the seafloor, and the Statue of Liberty has a laser in it. Like,
Jesus.
So there's this sort of bowdlerization, this sort of cartoony encroachment on franchises as they go on, from something approaching a serious vision early on to complete bonkersness as the expansions go on, which I feel like kind of also happens to Warcraft and kind of in cycles of goofy, serious.
Yeah, well, it's actually it's funny. Command and Conquer and Red Alert and stuff feels like it's like a half generation above my head. Because I, at least for me, I didn't really get into PC gaming until I was like 18, 19, 20. Like I just didn't have a good computer, and then I would like play it on friends' computers, and then obviously, I moved into the industry, and computers, they'll just throw computers at you. At that point, they're like, play all this shit, and you're like, okay, that's fine. But no, I had no idea that Red Alert was steeped in that sort of alternate history. That's crazy to think about. There was one thing I wanted to go back and kind of hit on, because you were talking about just the stark difference between Diablo 1 and Diablo 3. And we'll see if we can get through an episode without me mentioning it, but for now we're 2 for 2. It reminded me very much of my recent playthrough of Dark Souls Remastered on stream versus Dark Souls 3. And it's crazy because I think in probably both cases for the Diablo franchise and the Souls franchise, I recommend people play the latest one. And people are like, oh, don't you have to know the lore? Don't you have to know the thing? And I'm like, well, no, they're mostly based on these sorts of gameplay loops. Like they're similar enough, and you kind of go to them for the same experiences. But Dark Souls 1, similar to your description of Diablo 1, it was slow. The music was not bombastic. It was not loud. In some cases, it wasn't even present. It's both it and Diablo. It's interesting. They were made without a concept of what their franchise would be like. Right, yeah. It's always crazy to go back and to play the first games of these big franchises, because you're seeing some of these ideas implemented before they knew people would ever like them at all, and you generally get a hint as things move on, like what stuff made it, what stuff didn't. But it's interesting to think that games like Diablo 3 and Dark Souls 3 are in part designed by the audience and designed by what people responded to or what they didn't respond to, and that's how you get such wildly different, sometimes very streamlined experiences. Even as far as Dark Souls goes, Dark Souls 3 is why I recommended it to people. Is it's much more focused on the combat mechanics and delivering what feel like blockbuster moments, right? Even the most tame boss thematically still feels like a challenge to overcome, and in that sense it feels like you're getting your, what do they say it, it's candy, I guess, and it's not to say there's no meat to the experience, but you're very much like, I want to go to the next fight because I want to overcome the next challenge and feel like a badass and do the thing, where Souls 1 is like, some of these bosses are weak and shitty and reflections of the world around them, and you're meant to, with every action, think about how you're impacting the world around you, where most of that is gone by the third one, right? And you're saying, Diablo 1 has this very slow, methodical, like, you got to plan stuff out. There's, check out all this hallowed imagery where, by the third one, it's like angels punching demons in the face, like, it's just, we've taken it into overdrive. And even, like you say, the gameplay, like, loot fucking dropping nonstop, constant zombie hordes, right? Because it took what got people addicted to the original games and was like, let's just amp that up times a million. And so, I don't know, there's kind of drawing those comparisons now. I don't know if I like it, I don't know if I don't like it, but it definitely feels like the later in the franchise you go, most successful ones just take what was best and tune it up to 1,000, and it feels like usually that's consumer friendly, that's audience friendly, but sometimes maybe there's some stuff that gets lost in that transition.
The best example there, like something that kind of came to mind, is I think the difference between Diablo 1, Diablo 3 is kind of like the difference between Batman Arkham Asylum and the last one, what was it, Arkham Knight.
Yeah,
like it's kind of the same thing that happened there, where you have this original game that's this very specific, Batman, mental asylum, crazy patients, let's get in his head, let's fuck with him, let's beat him up over the course of the game, and it's sort of this slow, desperate grind through a Metroidvania, and then by the third game it's like, go everywhere, do everything, you can fly now, you have a car, you have a tank car, your tank car can fly.
Yeah. No, it's actually, it's interesting, because it's not like, I don't think that the developers thought that Arkham Asylum wouldn't be successful in some way, but you can almost tell that they made it like they weren't going to get another chance, right? They're like, let's not leave anything out. Let's make this small experience that feels very tight. In the asylum is not very big, but way in which you explore around them and way that knowledge comes into play later. Where as you talk about it, it gets to be like it goes from a small adventure with Batman into Grand Theft Auto with the Batmobile. And it, I've played both games. I like them a lot. I actually played halfway through Arkham Knight a long, long time ago, and we're going to be playing through it again on stream sometime in the future. So I'm going to super revisit that one and see how I feel about it. But yeah, the kind of, I don't know, the nature of the scale shifting, definitely you lose some of the methodical feelings of Batman from the first one, where you're like, wow, how is he going to navigate this whole evening, where you can kind of account for all these variables, where the latter one is it's let's slam blockbuster after blockbuster, high moment after high moment, because we have now integrated the whole a much larger world that you can play with, and that sort of demands that you can't have a slow story that builds up. It's more just okay, let's start doing the comic books thing that comic books do well, which is, where's every single villain? They're probably here. Where's every character that Batman's met? The city's big enough. We can just jam them all in. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting trend of development, I think, to consider as things go. It's something that happens to long run in TV series and stuff like that. There's always this, once you've kind of exhausted the original premise, then you have to expand it in order to find new material to tell stories about. But we do have some topics actually from commenters who asked us, stuff that they would like to hear us talk about. And one of the ones that stuck out to me is mental health in video games, how it's used as a thing in video games, as a mechanic, how it's portrayed, what it means to a character. And the reason it stuck out to me is because I remember playing a long time ago, back, I think it was in the early 2000s or something, I played a game that I can't remember what the hell it was called, but it was sort of a Diablo-like. It was sort of a hack and slashy, a top-down hack and slashy loot grind game. Mm-hmm. And one of the characters was a maniac. And he had abilities where, the longer he was in combat, he would become more and more insane, and then he could spend his insanity meter on, using abilities, using spells, or going particularly crazy, and then getting damage boosts and stuff like that. And at the time, I didn't really think too hard about it. But looking back at it, as an image of how video games like to consider mental health, I thought it was a little bit stark, this idea of, oh, we can gamify this. Yeah, when you messaged me this morning and you said this is one of the ones that we wanted to talk about, I kind of felt weird because I was I don't know if this has been done well, and it's I have to, at the top of this, I don't know if you've played it, but I feel before we get into the main discussion, I want to talk about it. There is a game called Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Most people who have played it probably knew that it was going to get mentioned, but if you haven't, I have not, disclaimer, I have not yet played it. It is on my list that we're going to stream, but it has been lauded by most news and review outlets as a game that is heavily focused on showing mental health issues in a way that don't feel vapid or gamified without some sort of respect to it. And the main character apparently suffers from some disorders, and it's all handled rather well. Can't speak to whether that is or isn't the case, but if that's another game that you were maybe on the fence about, there's a tidbit about it that you might think about. But yeah, so moving on, and more to your point, Skyen, there's really this thing where it feels like, you're talking about spending insanity points, spending your crazy juice, right? I played Grand Theft Auto 5 last year, and there is a lot of deeply problematic issues with that game that the game even attempts to acknowledge. To what end, I'm not really certain. But one of the main characters, Trevor, kind of the infamous main character, has rampages where he goes insane. You start seeing red. You gain a ton of damage reduction. You have infinite ammo, and so there's kind of this thing where, regardless of whether or not someone is endorsing it on the face of it, there is a a like duplicitous demonizing and romanticizing of mental health issues that happens in games, right? Where like it's like the source of some people's strength, right? Or you know, and I feel conflicted about that, because on one hand I feel like everyone should feel like, whether you are bipolar or whether you are autistic or whether you suffer from depression, that you should feel like there can be ways out or upsides or ways that you can maybe channel some of the things about it. And maybe that's a naive message, but I also don't think it means, you know, you're good at rampaging, or you're one step off from killing people, or you somehow feel less pain because your brain's different or something. I don't know. It's leave it to games to kind of, I think, do something like that. I don't know. How do you feel about all this?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, because anytime I think about mental health in the context of video games, I tend to go back to like horror video games of various kinds. Mm-hmm. And I think, I can't remember if it was like Amnesia or one, but there was this popular indie horror game a while back where the longer you stay in the dark, the more insane you get, and sort of the world distorts around you. And then once you go into the light, your mental health is somehow magically restored, and you can see the world for what it is. And you have to go into the dark because that's the only way to hide from the monsters. And like horror games in particular are fond of exploring sort of the mental state of the protagonist as a source of horror, as a source of fear. And but games like that kind of stand out to me as they sort of operationalize mental illness as something that you can control to a certain extent, like something that you can manipulate for your own benefit, to your own ends, and where you can make sensible choices about, but if I go 20% insane and stay in the dark for this long, then I can optimize my output in order to overcome this challenge and such. And that's sort of that's the thing I've always found kind of insidious about the ways in which like video games tend to approach real world issues of all kinds, is they can't resist turning it into a game mechanic. And a game mechanic being a game mechanic, the optimal play is to optimize around, you know, a simple pro-con analysis of what this gameplay mechanic can do for you in the context of your current gameplay session. And that's the thing I think is, it kind of gets kind of gross and reductive sometimes with mental health in video games, is this sort of this reduction of, it's just a mechanic in the game of your life, rather than it is an uncontrollable force that hovers over me and fucks with my head at random times for no reason, with no benefit, nothing, just something that is profoundly outside of most people's control, really.
Yeah, it's there's kind of an interesting thing there too. You're talking about like ways that you can control it, right? Because I think on the whole you can't, but I do think that you can sometimes bargain with it. You can kind of like make concessions. Like I've suffered from depression for a long time. Also have had like ADHD that has gone terribly undiagnosed my entire life until very, very recently. And I've always thought about, you know, in terms of like gathering motivation or energy to do things as almost a game in and of itself, right? It's like I can feel like, when I have a whole bunch of work that I need to do, when I need to get up for a podcast, it's like it feels like there are certain gates or certain things that my brain has to do before I'm then allowed to move on to this next thing. And I think everybody kind of has to some degree these sorts of tics, right? And I kind of wish that I could see games try to tackle dealing with your mental health in a way that is maybe similar. Like it feels like this is an entity almost outside of you that you are sort of working with. And so I will actually say now that I'm talking about this more, there's a couple examples of things that I think people really should check out. I think one is a game that also came out somewhat recently within the last year called Celeste. If people aren't super familiar with Celeste, it is a precision platformer, but it has a whole host of ways to customize the experience if the words precision platformer kind of spook you away. But they deal with a lot of depression and a whole ton of mental pressure that the main character, who I believe is you name them, but I think maybe their name is Madison or something. We named her as Jamie.
Maddie, I think.
Yeah. And it provides like a really, the gameplay itself isn't 100%, like focused on the mental aspects of it, but it provides a very, very deep and I think nuanced reflection of self-loathing and getting over a lot of issues within your own mind because her depression and her anxiety actually physically manifests as like a dark version of herself that she interacts with multiple times on the mountain, sometimes in more ways than others. But one thing that struck me was there's a point where someone's having a panic attack and the game shows you a feather and you literally have to hold like you're breathing in and then release like you're breathing out to get this feather within a certain zone, and as you practice the deep breathing in the game, the rest of the game actually melts away, and there's only focus on this feather until the situation kind of passes. And I was like, wow, that is a cool depiction of what it is like to suffer from a panic attack, and how easy it is sometimes, easier than we think when we're in an anxious kind of bout to pull yourself out of it, right? And people say you got to ground yourself. You have to kind of pull yourself out of it, snap out of it or whatever, and how that doesn't mean take a dramatic action, but honestly sometimes means relax, force yourself to breathe, like take a real world action that can kind of prompt this. And so, I don't know, Celeste was actually, I think, a very good one for people to check out if they want to know more about it.
Yeah. I mean, my thing is always, usually when like I said, when games use mental health as a mechanic, like as a part of your gameplay, that's when I kind of get skeeved out. But something I adore, something I really enjoy is when, like in Celeste, where like you have Maddie whose task is to climb this mountain, and it quickly becomes very clear that the mountain is not just a mountain; it's like a metaphor for kind of a personal journey, and that's the kind of thing I really like when it comes to exploring mental health and mental states. And that kind of got me thinking about, did you ever play Journey back on the PS3?
I had Journey kind of ruined for me, and so I didn't end up playing it myself. I feel like maybe it's a game that I still should play, but it's one that like I'm familiar with it. I've seen the stuff, but I cannot say that I was hit emotionally super hard by the experience in the way that you might expect.
Yeah, because like when I played it for the first time, it was relatively new, and it had this special feature where occasionally while you play, other players will show up in your game, and it's not like and you can opt out of it by just turning your internet off, but it's just a thing. They can just be there. They can't hinder you. They can't do anything to stop you or prevent you or really interact with you much in any way at all. The only way that you can really interact with other players is if you stick close to them. They will charge up your float mechanic so that you can jump higher and float longer, and you can use a single button press to kind of call to the other person. And since there's no way to hinder each other, there's no way to troll in the game at all. And so Journey, the game, is very much about making a journey. It's very much, the name is the game, where you're going from like a sort of graveyard in a desert to the top of a mountain. And playing it for the first time, I ran into another player who was, I think, somewhat more experienced than me, but like we couldn't chat, we couldn't talk to each other. So I just kind of resolved to move on through the game, but they started following me around. And all they really did was, like, occasionally they would kind of call to me and go, hey, over here, there's a secret. And they would lead me to that secret. And so we started forming this bond, essentially. I started working out how to communicate with them. They were communicating with me. We were journeying across this game together. And I'm not going to spoil too much, but by the end of the game, as in most stories, there is an emotional low point. But what really fascinated me was the way in which, if you have another player with you and you are walking together, you can stave off the bad stuff that happens for much longer than you can if you're walking alone. And you can encourage each other. You can use like the few mechanics that there are for interaction to help each other out. And like, I got really fucking emotional when I played Journey for the first time. It's one of the most emotionally affecting games I've ever played because I had no idea what to expect when I went in, and it completely got me in the heart. And that low point in the story, I mean, I think I would have been kind of shattered no matter what, but the thing that really fucking got to me during the course of that game is I was terrified that if my friend left before the gameplay session was over, like if they had to disconnect or if they weren't there, I would be scared and lonely inside of this game. And I felt it was the first time in my life, I think at that point, I had ever felt the opposite of social anxiety, which was like a powerful need to be close to this person. Like a person who I've never spoken to in my life. We've only ever interacted through a video game, but it was the first time I ever felt my mental state shift from I don't want to play with other players, I don't fucking other people, just trouble, too much anxiety, too much stress, to holy shit, I want to keep this person. I want to be around this person. I want us to continue to commit to this thing together, where we have come so far and now we're at this low point. And that was sort of that was the first time I really felt like a game understood the power of what it can mean to just have another person with you on a journey, understood what that can do for the mental state of a player as they're going through each situation. Because I replayed the game later, and then like situations where I walked through the game without a companion were completely different. Not necessarily lonely, but the feeling and the sensation of going through it was so profoundly different. It was like playing a completely different game. And that was that was sort of the first moment where I felt like this game understood how to incorporate very, very powerful manipulation of a player's mental state into the gameplay mechanics without making the player's mental state a gameplay mechanic in itself.
Yeah, I also think, just to kind of piggyback off of that too, I don't think we talked about it last time, and I won't go too hard on it, but The Last Guardian...
yeah, we didn't talk about that, no.
Yeah, The Last Guardian was in my top 3, I believe, of all the games that I played last year. At the end of each year, I do a big breakdown of all the games that I streamed, and we rate them. We do a whole show. There's a VOD somewhere. I'll probably put it up at some point. But The Last Guardian is like what you just explained, but like with a pet. Like, yeah. It's weird because you'll hear a lot of people who have played The Last Guardian, or maybe if you haven't played it yourself, and you'll hear people be like, oh yeah, the controls were really sometimes. And I'm like, that's how you can tell. You can tell a lot about how someone feels about their pets, I think, from whether they super enjoyed or super didn't enjoy The Last Guardian, right? Because sometimes it is frustrating, but sometimes it requires patience from you, and maybe sometimes it requires not just patience from you, but patience maybe in kind of a different way than what you were thinking. Like, you actually have to step back and try to bargain and make concessions with this creature. And there are some very similar moments to what you were talking about, where like when they're gone, it is depressingly lonely, right? And when you are able to do things with them, you want to do things with them. Now, I think comparing the experiences, Journey is a lot more subtle and I think experimental for ways that I won't say or I won't spoil, but I definitely think they're worth checking out for anyone who sounds like this is their shit. Like, if you're trying to get some meaningful companionship in video games that doesn't require you to go be social necessarily, or give more of yourself than you're expecting, I think Journey and The Last Guardian as well, I think, are pretty cool, hopeful experiences in that way.
Yeah. That was the thing that kind of struck me about The Last Guardian, is I saw so many like reviews and people complaining that, oh, this animal will not do what I tell it the first time I tell it what to do, and it will not follow my commands exactly. And I was like, that sounds like a feature.
Oh yeah,
like that. It sounds like you're supposed to be frustrated with this big dumb animal that you're carrying or you're leading around in a world that it doesn't fully understand.
Yeah, so I'm seeing it like Chuckles here, my good dog. I will provide a picture of Chuckles that we can put in a description because this dog is precious. It's my partner's family's dog, and we've adopted him over the last few months as we moved to the Bay. And I mean, I can't tell this dog to do anything. It's very much my experience with that game is like mirrored in real time, where we have learned our own ways to communicate and our own ways to like show affection for one another. But yeah, it's like if you get frustrated with a dog or a pet, like it's not going to work out for you, right? Like, but if you take a different approach, you find that it's incredibly rewarding as an experience as well to kind of build that relationship. So. There was not the most graceful segue, but I was saying there was something else that you wanted to get to, and in our nature, we talk a lot. And I want to make sure we get
to all the topics.
Thing.
Yeah, there was another question from someone who asked about chess parents who had started to take up coaching in specifically in Fortnite, but in video games for their kids. And just to explain, a chess parent is someone who gets like unreasonably just intensely involved with their child succeeding at some kind of sports activity or some kind of, and it's named for like that stereotypical type of parent who often shows up in chess communities where they're like, you have to practice your chess homework, you have to go into chess club, you have to practice these chess puzzles, you have to where they're really, really deeply invested in getting their kid to be the best at, X thing. It also exists in sport, the most common example would probably be like stage moms and stage parents who are like, no, you have to go to the audition, you have to get the role, you have to become famous, you have to do the thing. And that's something that there's been some articles recently, and I'll put a link to one of those down in the description, where parents have started paying coaches to coach their kids, like pro players and stuff, to coach their kids in Fortnite to get them to be the best one in their class, specifically like at playing that game, because gaming to some extent apparently has acquired enough social capital that your kid being the best at it has some kind of social value to these parents. And that is so profoundly weird to me, because like I was used to seeing my friends like get kind of pushed by their parents into pursuing sports and doing other stuff, and my parents mostly with gaming is like, please do anything else. Literally anything else. Do anything but gaming.
Yeah. It's honestly, it's such a weird thing, especially with, I went through some of this. I know that you went through some of this. If anyone out there is listening, if there's a single person, please don't do this to your kids. Please do not. But I think in talking about it and kind of discussing it, it's interesting to me because I think, let's take me and maybe my peers, for instance, people that grew up at the exact same time that I did. I think many of us who played video games saw it as sort of a refuge or almost a rebellion from the normal things that we were being told to do, right? It was like, well, this is a thing that we chose for ourselves, and the more that we're told not to do it, the more that we do want to do it. And so it's interesting because now that generation is growing up and is going to start having kids soon, or in some cases already has. Probably not anyone that's in school yet, but I can imagine, many of my peers have been like, oh, I can't wait to play video games with my kids. And in that moment, I realized, well, my dad was probably like, oh, I can't wait for my kids to grow up playing chess. Sorry, Dad. None of us liked it. I liked it the most, but I still didn't like it all that much, right? And so I kind of understand, because from our perspective, it was like, well, why wouldn't you want to play video games when all the other options are available? And it's crazy because I think we're heading towards a future where it's possible that video games isn't even what our kids will want to do, right? Like it's kind of impossible for us to imagine that within the next 15 years or something that there will be something that kids want to do more than read or play sports or video games. But there very well may be. But I think it's important to understand that motivation, right? Where it's like, in the end, it is not about how good you are at activity. Right? It's not about which activity you choose. It's about that you choose an activity and that you are being supportive of the people who choose that activity, right? The coolest people that I know that graduated from me from our 10 years of going to the same schools and shit are the ones who very early on were like, oh, I like this thing that's unique or weird, and I've always liked it, and I've continued to like it as I grew up. I never changed my stripes. I never let myself be pushed in weird ways, and so that's kind of an interesting thing, right? It's like if we map that to a now gaming landscape, it's like, don't force your kids to play Fortnite if they love playing Stardew Valley. Push them to have the most support in their desire to do Stardew Valley things, right? Get them a Stardew Valley t-shirt. Defend them when they feel like they're being made fun of for not liking whatever the trend is, right? That to me is the kind of prevailing lesson of generations. Not, it's the same shit but with a new name, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's very true. The thing that interested me, though, is like I got to thinking about that, and I wonder how many of the parents who are like aggressively trying to get their kids into Fortnite are doing it because Epic announced a $100 million prize pool for the best Fortnite tournament. Like, how much of it, like, because there's always been an element of social prestige to all the other shit. Like, being a chess master, lots of social prestige. There's probably some money in that somewhere. Actor, yeah, definitely a lot of social prestige, a lot of money in that. Being a famous sports player of any kind, like in America especially, kids being, encouraged to pursue football and stuff like that, which is very much the same thing we have in Europe, where, like, soccer clubs recruit aggressively from like young kids clubs and shepherd people into talent programs and stuff like that. I wonder to what extent, like, because esports has so rapidly become more and more and more normalized to the point where now it has these multi-million-dollar prize pools and mainstream, like, Wall Street Journal write-ups when someone famous wins a big tournament. I wonder to what extent that's going to end up creating, like, the exact same kind of pressure that we've always had in all these other spheres. Like, if it is literally that gaming, a sign of gaming taking over the same place in culture as sports used to have, or indeed still does, that now there are toxic parents who are kind of living vicariously through their children or forcing their kids into these particular interests. That's weird for me to think about, but it might be happening.
I think... Yeah, my answer to that question is, like, definitely some percentage of parents, probably not a high percent, but I think any percent is too high, right? Like, that's kind of a fucked up thing. And I think it's, I don't know, I think throughout all of this, I think, maybe I don't want to assume anything of the person who asked the question or brought up the topic, but I think the important thing for us to do is not to sensationalize, the like, wow, I can't believe this is happening in here or this is happening there, but instead to condemn the behavior a lot of the time. It's like, yes, video games are now a current mainstream thing. The thing that we grew up with is now going to start to influence our lives in such a way that it is insane, right? Like, I sounds crazy to say, tag me in 60 years or whatever, but, like, I might be in a VR home when I'm 80, right? Like, we don't know how this is going to be and how it's really going to take over, right? And so what's important is instead of focusing on the bells and whistles, be like, hey, exploitative, like, parenthood is bad, and I should start thinking about it so that when I become a parent, maybe I'm part of a community of parents, I can notice it and I can call it out. Or how do I stop bullying of any sort, regardless of whether it's about someone's art or, worse, someone's sexuality, but also someone's game preferences, right? Like, and ask yourself, like, are you the person today engaging in the behaviors that you would be happy to see in your children or that you would want to do as a parent, And for some people, that's a whole hell of a lot of thinking to do, and you don't have to do it right now. But I think at some point you got to ask yourself those questions and be like, probably not, or how do I start changing that, right?
Yeah, because, like, the tone of the articles that have been around, like the Fortnite coaching, is that it was this sort of insane helicopter parent behavior.
Yeah.
That was sort of completely incomprehensible because they were still, like, in mainstream journalism, there is still that thing of gaming is not a substantial thing to invest your time within, alongside this sort of sensationalizing of, oh, parents are getting so obsessed with this new fad that they are doing this thing, which is terribly toxic, and that's why society is failing. And I think you're very right that you have to be very wary of not sensationalizing that aspect. Like this, this is a sign of the failing times, of how we have all fallen as a nation and a culture. I think you have to be very careful about that. But the thing that fascinates me is the extent to which, like, it sort of signals that we have to start treating gaming not as just this sort of silly escape for kids who can't be bothered to pick up a football, but as, no, we have to start treating this the same way we treat sports, where you have to be careful that there isn't, like, this one parent who's maybe a little bit too obsessed with reclaiming their own lost dreams of being an esports star. You have to be a little bit more, take it a little bit more seriously, because people are they're starting to emerge serious issues around it that you have to be aware of on a deeper scale than just, oh, video games, that's entertainment.
Yeah. Well, and I think here's kind of the interesting thing is, I don't want to go into the whole argument. I invite someone to tag me in comments if they feel the desire to. The whole just a quick sidestep to the whole our esports, sports, et cetera, right? I've thought a lot about this, and especially now that I'm not, like, working at Riot full time anymore, where I have my head in the esports Kool-Aid. I think I kind of feel like they're not, and I'm going to tie this back to my point, I promise. But what I'm saying is I think that they are more than sports. I think they can be, but I think to say that they are, or that gaming should feel like it is a legitimate sport, takes away from the incredible width and depth of gaming as a medium, right? Is the fact that we can say that some games are like novels, or that some games are like movies, or that some games are like sports should be an awesome thing. It should be an uplifting thing and a hope-inspiring thing for the future of the development of games, right? Not that it should try to perfectly mimic one or the other. So that said, unlike Sports Dad, who wants his kids to be into sports, right? I think if gaming is a thing that you want to share with the next generation, there is a staggering amount of ways in which you can do that. You were talking about it, and I was thinking about someone like Bjergsen, right? Having kids one day and having kids who want to play games one day. And I'm like, man, are those kids going to feel pressure because they're not good at all the video games? And then I was like, but they can also just play anything else together, right? Like you can completely, you don't have to align yourself on the competitive axis, right? There's you can play Animal Crossing together. And I don't mean to, I apologize as well for painting all games as either hyper competitive sports or Stardew Valley, but they're just good off the top examples, right? It's like you can find puzzle games, you can read novels together, you can do things like, Gone Home or Edith Finch or Phoenix Wright or Professor Layton, these things that are like very sidestepped from the normal gaming experiences, right? And so I think it's I don't know. Where I'm going with all of this is to say, if you are someone that wants to share gaming with your kids, or has a plan on it, be ready to be flexible, right? Don't force anxiety on them because, my kid isn't super good at fighting games or isn't super good at Dota or whatever. And of course, if that's what they want to do, then that'll be awesome. But I think that also makes this sort of chess parenting or video game parenting behavior a little more obtuse and a little easier to call out, because you can't mask the motivation as like, I just want them to succeed in the sport as easily as you can in today's age where, acting is acting and football is football, right? It's like, hey man, are you really in this to spend meaningful time with your offspring, or are you in it to do something for you? And I think that becomes very easy to see.
Yeah, and actually you kind of got me to crystallize a point I was trying to get at earlier, where I kind of agree with you that games shouldn't be sports, like they should, or at least that the idea that they shouldn't be just sports. That's kind of been my worry with the way that pretty much every company has been handling esports, is that the place that they look to is like traditional sports leagues and traditional sports league structures and traditional sports culture as a model, which makes a lot of sense from the broadcast perspective, I'm sure, but I really do think there is this risk of kind of you go into this pigeonhole of what the gaming is, and that's exactly the same thing as what chess parents do with chess, and pressuring the kids into summer camps and doing extracurricular studies, just really focusing on chess is your life now, you have to be the best one at chess, where it's but chess could also be drunk chess, or you could play basketball chess, where it's you take a move and then you go play a best of 3 in basketball, and then you go back to the board, and so there's all these weird as shit you can do around sports that isn't just the sport, that isn't just playing the game. And I feel like we should approach gaming in the same way, that it's this, you can be competitive, and that's fine, but don't pigeonhole it. Don't make it monolithic. Don't make it one thing that's important about gaming, which is being the best, where sometimes the important thing about gaming is having an emotional experience, going on an emotional journey up a mountain.
Yeah. And that's something that actually excites me the most about games moving forward, is that I think as games become larger and larger in terms of the role that they take in our lives, you're going to see, I mentioned some, but I think you're going to see even more gaming experiences made specifically for these alternative purposes, right? I think you're going to see a VR garden, if it doesn't already exist as I'm saying it, right? Like someone's probably going to develop the most high-tech, high-quality VR garden that you have to put literal days and hours into, because maybe some people aren't in a place where you can experience that, right? Or maybe it's important to have stuff that you would devote to as a pastime outside of games, but in a way that is accessible or reachable, right? It always blows my mind a little bit, because I'm too deep, as I think you are as well, that, all of the sorts of things that people do in their free time that isn't gaming, right? But at the same time, what if we could capture woodworking? What if we could capture home improvement, or if we could capture things like that in a way that felt satisfying enough outside of games, right? Or outside of whatever we're calling the traditional game, leveling up, beating stuff, finishing the game, competing against other people, staples of the gaming pastime, right? So I think, not to balloon this into a whole separate topic, right? But my TLDR is we're going to start seeing a lot of the supportive structure of the gaming ecosystem transform as well, right? Not just people adding money and putting money into it, but also, family structures are going to have to start to incorporate gaming or making plans for how they're going to deal with it, right? Developers are going to start targeting completely different audiences of people more than they already have with mobile games and console games. We're going to see really a transformative sort of landscape of gaming over the next 15 years or something, and with that is going to come a lot of opportunity for people who aren't as well versed in seeing the sorts of interactions and toxicity and shit that maybe some of us are used to manifest. And so I think it's I feel weird. I don't want to be like, it's up to all us veterans to help the normies, because most of us are dumb as hell anyways. But it's just it's just saying that we all have to be on our guard, because this is a sort of technological gold rush. And much like when the internet was extremely young, right? Think about how many people got scammed. Think about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, how many people got scammed, and that's still new and people are still getting scammed, right? So I think as tech expands and as gaming expands, I think we have to do our best to call out bad behavior in terms of ethical practices and shit, and do our best to hold on to the stuff that feels good. Don't pressure people. Don't bully people for what they like.
Yeah, because my brother has a kid, my most adorable nephew, and I love him to bits.
How old is this child that you are?
He's 6 years old now.
Okay, damn.
And of course he plays Minecraft on the iPad all the time, and he is like a little nascent gamer. He loves playing video games. He loves it when I bring my Switch over and stuff like that. And I've been sort of trying to encourage his parents to game alongside him. Mm-hmm. And I've kind of run up against the wall of just how much it's still, a lot of people don't really see gaming as this thing you can do with your kid. And I think you're very right that that's kind of the thing that it's going to be the generational challenge, is to make gaming into that thing that is truly a social experience, and that isn't just something a problem to be dealt with, but an opportunity to hang out and be friends. And it's been on my mind because it's been frustrating me, because I got him Zelda Link Between Worlds on 3DS, because he can't read yet. And so I was suggesting very heavily to his parents, maybe if you could sit down with him, you could read the text boxes and you could play together, and it could be like a social bonding activity, and you could teach him how to behave in video games so that maybe once he's on the internet and dealing with social media, he won't and it's there's still this wall with parents, and I've seen that with his friends as well. I've met some of his friends when they've had their parents over and stuff like that, where there's this wall where it's no, but gaming isn't that's not the same as other stuff. It's not the same as playing sports with your kid. It's not the same as, and that's what kind of drew me to the question in the first place, was that a little bit of hope that maybe gaming is breaking through to the space where it is the same as sports, where it is the same as these traditional parenting things where you hang out with your kid and you relate to them and you teach them how to, deal with the issues that come up in relationship to games, which for the future, good Lord, kids are going to need to teach their children and learn how to deal with online in general, that whole thing. But yeah, I think we got all over that topic in every way that was relevant and possible.
Hopefully we didn't completely miss the point. Missing the point is one of my specialties. So So again, as always, maybe this is a good time to say it. People who are at least in the YouTube comments of your videos, Sky, and I'm happy to be active and continue conversations. Obviously, I think we're both people who can be reached in some ways, but especially if there's stuff that we say on this show that you want to contest or talk about it. At least I will be happy to talk about it. Skyen will be busy deleting terrible YouTube comments and then posting them on Twitter, but I will at least engage with your comment before it gets deleted. usually.
Yeah, and as always, you can reach us on Twitter. Our handles are going to be in the description. You can always leave comments on the videos, and we'll try to read them and respond to as much as possible. And of course, you can also catch Patrick when he's streaming. Where do you stream, Patrick?
I stream on twitch.tv/Scarizard Plays, and I stream Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Mondays I have off because I'm either doing a bunch of side work, recording this with you, and always uploading an episode of my Magic the Gathering Commander gameplay series, Friendetta, of which there will be the third up today. And so if you're interested in Magic, or even if you're not super interested in Magic, I suggest checking it out, because we try to edit them so that they feel fun and you can grasp the politicking, and it's, you can kind of digest it like a podcast, hopefully. You just turn it on and things happen and people freak out. And
I've been tuning into those videos. They're really fun.
Thank you.
And I haven't played Magic in years, but it's really fun just to, because it's just Patrick and his friends hanging out and being kind of assholes to each other and playing Magic together. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
If you want to catch me, you can head, well, you're probably already on the YouTube channel, but if you're not, there's going to be a link down in the description to my YouTube channel where I do videos about stuff, much like talky stuff where I chat about things that interest me, not unlike a podcast, except I don't have an even more handsome co-host to kind of derail the conversation and bring us off topic. You can also find me on Twitter, twitter.com/TBSkyen, and Scarizard is twitter.com/Scarizard Plays. And so with that, I think we're calling this episode to a close at around an hour. I feel like that's a good length.
I think generally 45 to an hour, unless we're super passionate, is probably the good spot. I will say before we go, I did have a weird moment last night. I was winding down. I've been leveling through World of Warcraft because I have some friends at Blizzard that worked in the new expansion. I want to check it out, and I usually try to have some YouTube running in the other side. And I was like, you know what? Let's go check out some more of your videos. And I tried to respond to you. It was so weird to hear you talking just openly, like answering questions and stuff, that I tried to then say words to you for a moment and I had to stop myself. I was like, oh, he's not here. It's 3 a.m. What the fuck am I doing? That's not how this works at all. But yeah.
So we have a social and a parasocial relationship at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
This is amazing.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if you knew that happened, but now you know. And now you know that I speak to your videos, Skyen, because they speak to me.
Thank you all very much for tuning in and listening. We're going to hopefully have another episode of this up in 2 weeks. If you have any comments, any questions, any topic suggestions, anything you'd like us to weigh in on or talk about, or like relationship advice, don't ask us about relationship advice. It's a terrible idea. But if you want to, and if you want to receive absolutely awful advice, from me anyway, probably good advice from Patrick because he's got a fantastic relationship with a cool person, you can leave that down below as well. This has been the BusyBeards podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Goodbye, everybody.